You are hearing this now, because something in you is ready to stop searching. Not because you failed. Not because you were late. But because the part of you that waits quietly has finally stepped forward. This moment was never meant to find everyone. It finds the ones who sit in silence longer than most. The ones who notice patterns before they're explained. The ones who have lived entire lifetimes inwardly while appearing still on the outside. You may have believed that awakening is supposed to be dramatic. That it demands suffering. Years of unraveling. Endless healing loops before you're allowed to arrive anywhere meaningful. But what if that belief was never true? What if the reason awakening feels distant is not because it's hard, but because it's been misunderstood? You weren't meant to reach something new. You were meant to remember something obvious. And that's the part no one tells you. Because the truth is uncomfortable to systems built on effort, struggle, and endless becoming. The truth is quieter than ambition. Simpler than transformation narratives. And it doesn't reward those who chase it, it reveals itself to those who stop pushing. You didn't come across this message at the start of a journey. You came across it at the moment where the old way quietly expires. That subtle fatigue you've been feeling? Not tiredness, completion. That sense that your usual coping mechanisms don't work anymore? That's not weakness. That's awareness outgrowing noise. You may have noticed moments lately, small ones. A pause in your thoughts while staring at nothing. A sudden calm with no explanation. A strange familiarity in silence as if you've been here before. Those weren't accidents. They were brief reunions. The reason this matters now is because reconnection doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't beg for attention. It waits until the listener becomes quiet enough to hear it. And you are quieter than you used to be. Not externally. Internally. This isn't about becoming spiritual. It's about realizing you never stopped being connected. The doorway you've been circling isn't locked. It never was. You just weren't meant to force it open. What source really is demystifying the concept. You've heard the word source before. Most people have. And almost everyone imagines it as something distant. A place above, beyond, outside of themselves. That misunderstanding alone has kept countless people searching in the wrong direction. Source is not a destination. Not a being watching from somewhere else. Not something that grants access based on worth, effort, or purity. Source is simpler than that. Which is exactly why it's overlooked. Source is the awareness that notices you are thinking. The quiet presence that remains when a thought finishes and another hasn't begun yet. The steady background that never reacts, even while emotions rise and fall. It isn't mystical in the way stories describe. It's practical. Immediate. Ordinary in the way breathing is ordinary, so constant you forget it's happening. You don't enter source. You don't channel it. You don't earn it through discipline or pain. You recognize it. Right now, as you listen, thoughts are appearing. Memories, questions, images, subtle reactions. But something else is present too, something watching all of that occur. That watcher isn't your personality. It isn't your history. It isn't your name or your role in the world. It's what remains the same whether you feel confident or uncertain, calm or overwhelmed. Source is not emotional. It doesn't fluctuate with mood. It doesn't disappear during doubt. It is the baseline consciousness that was present before your first belief and will remain after your last one fades. This is why awakening isn't about adding knowledge. Knowledge belongs to the mind. Source exists prior to thought. Awakening is not an achievement. It's a recognition. Like realizing the room has always been lit after fumbling for a switch in the dark. The mind wants complexity. It wants systems. It wants steps, proof, validation. But source doesn't respond to effort. It responds to noticing. The moment you stop trying to understand awareness and simply observe it, something shifts quietly. No fireworks. No announcement. Just a subtle sense of returning to something familiar. This is why some people never find it. They're too busy trying to become someone else. And this is why you're hearing this now. Because you've already tried becoming. And somewhere along the way you realized becoming never brought rest. What you're moving toward isn't higher. It's closer. Closer than your thoughts. Closer than your breath. Closer than the identity you've been carrying. Source has never been hidden from you. It's been waiting behind the noise. Patient, unchanging, and quietly present every time you pause long enough to notice that you are here. You're already touching source daily. Here's the part most people never realize. You've already been connecting to source. Not during rituals. Not during meditation. Not during moments you labeled as spiritual. It's been happening in the in-between spaces. The moments you didn't name. The seconds you didn't analyze. Think about the instant just before sleep. When thoughts slow and the day loosens its grip. Or the pause after someone asks you a question. And your mind goes blank for a split second before answering. That empty moment. That's it. You may have felt it while staring out of a window, watching rain trace patterns on glass, or standing in line with no desire to check your phone. For a brief moment, nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed proving. You weren't trying to be anything. And then the mind rushed back in and filled the space. Most people miss these moments because they don't feel dramatic. There's no emotion attached. No story to tell afterward. No label that says this mattered. So the mind dismisses them. But source doesn't arrive with sensation. It arrives with absence. The absence of effort, commentary, and self-monitoring. This is why spiritually sensitive people often feel confused. You've tasted peace many times, yet you were taught to look for intensity instead. You were told awakening feels like energy surging through the body, visions, clarity, certainty. Sometimes it does. But the foundation is always quiet. Source reveals itself when the mind stops narrating for just a breath. And because you weren't looking for it, you touched it naturally. Children do this constantly. Animals live there. Artists fall into it mid-creation without realizing why time disappears. The connection fades the moment you try to hold it. The moment you think, oh, this is it. That's not a flaw. That's the design. Source cannot be grasped because it isn't an object. It's the space in which grasping happens. This is why chasing awakening feels exhausting. You're already stepping into the doorway, then turning around to check if you're doing it right. What's coming next isn't about creating a new state. It's about recognizing the one you already touch every single day without crediting it. There is a reason these moments have been increasing for you lately. The pauses are getting longer. The silence feels less uncomfortable. That's not coincidence. That's readiness beginning to surface. And there's a reason you haven't been taught how to stay there. Because staying doesn't require effort. It requires something most people never practice. Not interfering. The ancient 5-minute practice, introduction. There is a reason this practice survived without being advertised. A reason it was passed quietly, often without instruction and sometimes without words at all. It doesn't impress the mind. It doesn't create an identity. And it can't be turned into a performance. Which is exactly why it works. This practice is older than formal religion. Older than philosophy. Older than the idea that awakening must look like effort. It was never designed to do anything to you. It was designed to reveal what's already functioning beneath everything else. 5 minutes was never a rule. It was a signal. A reminder that if something requires hours of struggle, it's aimed at the mind, not awareness. The reason this practice was overlooked for centuries is because it offers no leverage for control. No hierarchy. No authority figure needed. You don't improve at it. You don't progress through levels. You don't collect proof that it's working. In fact, the moment you try to measure it, you step out of it. This practice doesn't reward discipline. It rewards honesty. It asks only one thing of you. To stop correcting your experience. Most people believe truth is found through thinking harder, feeling more, or breaking through resistance. But the body already knows how to return to coherence without instruction. That's why this practice doesn't start with beliefs. It starts with sensation. Because the body cannot pretend. It cannot speculate. It can only report what is real in the moment. You don't sit a certain way. You don't clear your mind. You don't breathe in a special pattern. You simply allow what is already happening to be noticed. This is why spiritually sensitive people feel drawn to it without knowing why. You've always known effort wasn't the answer. You just didn't have permission to stop. The simplicity may feel unsettling at first. Your mind might say this can't be enough. That thought is expected. It's the sound of conditioning loosening its grip. Because nothing about this practice feeds the ego. There is no role to play. No image to maintain. Just presence meeting itself. The 3 layers of the practice. This practice doesn't begin with effort. It begins with noticing what is already happening without your permission. Nothing needs to change for this to work. And that's the part the mind struggles with most. First layer, noticing the breath. Not controlling it. Not slowing it down. Not shaping it into something meaningful. Just noticing that it's happening. The breath moves whether you pay attention or not. Awareness simply watches it rise and fall. Like observing waves without naming the ocean. You may notice tension, irregular rhythm, or nothing special at all. All of it is allowed. The moment you try to improve the breath, you step out of observation and back into management. And management belongs to the mind. Here you're not fixing. You're witnessing. Second layer, awareness in the body. Without scanning. Without searching. Just feeling the body from the inside. Maybe it's pressure where you're sitting. Warmth in the chest. A subtle hum you can't describe. Thoughts may continue. Emotions may surface. None of that interrupts awareness, because awareness includes them. This is where many people get confused. They think stillness means the absence of activity. But awareness is present even when the mind is busy. You don't wait for silence. You notice the space in which sound appears. Third layer, non-forcing, the key insight. This is where the practice quietly opens. At some point you realize there's nothing left to do. No state to reach. No moment to arrive at. You stop leaning forward internally. And in that stopping, something softens. Awareness doesn't deepen because you tried harder. It reveals itself because you stopped interfering. This is the moment most people skip. Because effort feels productive. Non-forcing feels unfamiliar. But the doorway has always opened this way. You don't push into awareness. You let awareness notice itself. And when that happens, even briefly, something irreversible begins. Not because you changed anything, but because you recognized what was already here. Why the practice works. This is where the shift becomes noticeable, even if nothing dramatic happens. The practice works because it doesn't fight the mind. It doesn't try to silence thoughts or correct emotions. It simply removes them from the center. When awareness watches the breath, thoughts lose their authority. They don't disappear, but they move to the background, like noise from another room. The mind thrives on engagement. Questions, reactions, resistance. This practice offers none of that. Instead of chasing thoughts, you remain as the space in which they appear. That single repositioning changes everything. The nervous system begins to recognize safety. Not because circumstances changed, but because you stopped signaling threat through constant internal commentary. This is why people feel subtle relief before they feel clarity. The body relaxes before the mind understands. Awareness doesn't need to be activated. It's always on. What changes is your relationship to it. When you stop identifying with every thought, they lose their grip. Stories soften. Old loops loosen. You may notice moments where thinking pauses on its own. Not forced. Not controlled. Just quiet. Those moments don't feel empty. They feel neutral. Stable. And here's what most people don't expect. Once awareness recognizes itself, it doesn't fully unlearn that recognition. Even if the mind returns. Even if emotions surge again. Something beneath it all remains steady. This is why change begins to feel irreversible. Not because you achieved something, but because you can't unsee what you've noticed. The mind can argue. It can doubt. It can try to reclaim control. But awareness doesn't participate in debate. It waits. And once you've felt that quiet continuity, even briefly, you start to realize something profound. You were never trapped in thought. You were just standing too close to it. It has everything to do with readiness. Why awakening speeds differ for everyone. You may have wondered why some people seem to recognize this instantly, while others circle it for years without landing. It's tempting to assume it's about discipline, or intelligence, or being more spiritual. It isn't. Awakening doesn't move on a timeline. It responds to readiness. Readiness isn't something you develop through effort. It forms quietly through life experience. Through exhaustion, disillusionment, and the slow collapse of false certainty. Some people arrive here quickly because they haven't built strong defenses around identity. Their beliefs are flexible. Their self-image isn't rigid. When awareness appears, there's nothing blocking the view. Others take longer because they're deeply invested in being someone specific. A thinker, a healer, a seeker, a survivor. Those identities aren't wrong. They're just heavy. The more you need a story to remain intact, the harder it is to step outside it. Readiness often comes after disappointment. After success didn't deliver peace. After understanding didn't resolve restlessness. This is why awakenings often follow periods of loss or quiet collapse. Not as punishment, but as openings. You don't earn readiness. It emerges when resistance runs out. That's why no two awakenings look the same. Some unfold in days. Some take years of gentle unraveling. And neither is better. If this recognition feels close for you now, it's not because you're special. It's because you're less defended. Less interested in being right. Less attached to explanations. More willing to sit in not knowing. That willingness is rare. And it's the real doorway. Comment, highlight, and reflection. Someone once put it into words more honestly than most ever do. They said, the hardest part of ending is starting again. Not because the ending hurts, but because the beginning doesn't come with instructions. That space between who you were and who you're no longer pretending to be can feel strangely empty. Not dramatic. Not tragic. Just unfamiliar. You may have noticed this yourself. Old motivations don't pull you the way they used to. Achievements feel quieter. Arguments lose their charge before they even begin. And yet, nothing new has fully taken shape. This in-between can feel disorienting. Like standing in a room after the furniture has been removed, unsure how the space is meant to be used. Most people rush to fill it. With distractions. With new labels. With louder goals. But this phase isn't asking to be filled. It's asking to be witnessed. The courage here isn't dramatic. It's subtle. It's the courage to not immediately replace one identity with another. To let the silence stay longer than what's comfortable. To resist the urge to explain yourself, to yourself. This is where many turn back. Not because they can't continue, but because the unknown feels too exposed. But if you found yourself lingering here, feeling both untethered and strangely calm, that's not failure. That's honesty. Endings are familiar. We've practiced them our whole lives. Beginnings, true ones, require you to move forward without rehearsing the outcome. And if this reflection stirred something in you, it's because you're not afraid of endings anymore. You're standing at the edge of a beginning. That doesn't ask you to become more, only to stop pretending. The real factor, readiness, not spiritual status. It's easy to believe awakening belongs to a certain type of person. The disciplined, the devoted, the ones who look like they have it together. But that idea quietly slows everything down. There is no spiritual rank. No invisible hierarchy deciding who is meant to wake up first. What matters isn't how much you know. It's how little you're holding on to. Readiness has nothing to do with being chosen. It has everything to do with openness. Openness doesn't mean optimism. It doesn't mean positivity. It means you're no longer arguing with your experience. You're no longer trying to make reality fit an idea of how it should feel. This is why some deeply knowledgeable people remain stuck. They're invested in being right, in explaining, in maintaining coherence through belief. Awareness doesn't negotiate with belief systems. The more tightly you grip your conclusions, the less room there is for recognition. This doesn't mean intelligence is a problem. It means attachment is. The mind loves certainty. But awakening begins where certainty softens. You may have noticed that lately you don't feel the same need to convince yourself or anyone else. Questions linger without demanding answers. Paradoxes don't irritate you the way they used to. That's readiness. Not clarity. Not confidence. Availability. And here's the quiet truth. People who awaken quickly aren't ahead. They're simply less defended. They don't need their worldview to survive. They're willing to be wrong. Even about themselves. Fast awakeners versus slow awakeners. Some people seem to merge with awareness almost instantly. They touch source and life bends around them as if it's always been waiting for their arrival. These are the fast awakeners. Not because they are special. Not because they've earned it. But because resistance is low and openness is high. Their inner systems are soft enough to notice without forcing. Their identity flexible enough to let something unfamiliar take root. Then there are the slow awakeners. Those who linger in the loops of thought, belief, and habit. They ask questions, read books, seek guidance. They want proof. They want certainty before stepping forward. Every small insight is filtered through identity. What does this mean about who I am? What will others think if I embrace this? Both paths are valid. Both reach the same place eventually. Fast awakeners are often impatient to share, to act, to see results immediately. Slow awakeners carry depth, nuance, and a resilience born from repeated self-reflection. Neither is better. Neither is wrong. They are simply different expressions of timing. Potential isn't the difference. Readiness is. And readiness is never measured by intelligence, discipline, or even spiritual dedication. What matters is the willingness to let the mind step aside, even if just for a moment, and notice the presence that has been there all along. The true obstacle, noise. The real reason awakening feels impossible isn't a lack of power, guidance, or opportunity. It isn't the world. It isn't fate. It's noise. Not the literal sounds around you, but the constant internal chatter that fills every corner of the mind. Stories about who you should be. Judgments about what's happening. Worries about the future. Regrets about the past. Comparisons. Explanations. Expectations. This noise masquerades as identity. It pretends to be life itself. And the louder it gets, the harder it is to notice what's quiet beneath it. Every thought, every story, every assumption is a filter, blocking the natural awareness that's always present. Noise is inherited. It comes from survival patterns, cultural pressures, and learned reactions. It comes from a lifetime of doing before being, reacting before observing. And the irony is this: The more you push, analyze, and try to fix yourself, the louder the noise becomes. Fast awakeners bypass noise naturally. Their openness allows it to exist in the background without claiming their attention. Slow awakeners often get caught in loops, believing the mind itself is the enemy. But the mind isn't the problem. Noise is the problem. The mind becomes a tool only once you stop feeding it with urgency, fear, and attachment. Once that happens, awareness, source, begins to be visible through the clutter, even in small moments. And that's where real transformation starts, not in chasing, controlling, or adding, but in allowing the noise to become what it really is: background. Why disconnection feels so common. You may have noticed how often life feels muted, restless, numb, distracted, as if the clarity you glimpsed in fleeting moments of silence is always just out of reach. This is not a flaw in you. It is the natural consequence of accumulated noise. Years, sometimes lifetimes, of reacting, resisting, and overthinking build layers between awareness and everyday experience. Each story you tell yourself about who you are, what should happen, and how things are supposed to be adds a brick to that wall. Disconnection feels normal because you've been taught to live inside the bricks, to organize your world around thought, emotion, and habit, rather than the awareness that underlies them. Yet even through that fog, source is still present. It hasn't abandoned you. It's waiting quietly behind the chatter, like sunlight behind a clouded sky. The subtle shifts you've been feeling, moments of inexplicable peace, synchronicities, or sudden clarity, are glimpses through that veil. You've touched connection countless times without recognizing it, because life demanded you operate through the mind instead of the still space inside you. The truth is, connection is never built. It is always revealed. It doesn't appear as a reward for effort. It appears when you stop trying to reach it and notice what already exists. Most people never reach that awareness because they treat disconnection as permanent. They try to fix, control, or manipulate it. And every attempt thickens the veil. But here's the quiet miracle. Awareness doesn't need permission. It doesn't need force. It simply waits, ready to meet you the moment you allow the noise to soften. In the next part, you'll understand why urgency is actually a hidden ally, and why the timing of your recognition matters more than you think. Why urgency matters. There's a subtle urgency in your life right now. You may have felt it as a low hum in your chest. A quiet pressure that nothing external can satisfy. This isn't panic. It isn't fear. It's a signal. Noise grows when it's ignored. Every hesitation, every distraction, every delay strengthens the old identity, the one built on stories, shoulds, and surviving rather than being. The longer you postpone recognition, the heavier the mind becomes. Opportunities to notice your own awareness slip past unnoticed. Small cracks in perception, which could have been doorways, remain closed. Yet urgency doesn't demand effort. It doesn't say hurry up or fail. It whispers, pay attention now because this moment is rare. Momentum works both ways. The quicker you notice, the lighter the mind becomes. The sooner you step into quiet, the sooner the body remembers safety. The nervous system recalibrates, and subtle intuition begins to guide you. This is why your restless feeling, your impatience, your inner stirring, is actually your ally. It's the gentle push reminding you to stop living entirely in stories. To stop postponing the recognition of what's already present. Awakening doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when readiness meets opportunity. And right now, that alignment is quietly waiting for you. What happens when you begin reconnecting? The moment you begin to reconnect, it's rarely dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or clarity that solves every problem. Instead, it whispers. Small shifts ripple quietly through your perception. You may notice intuition rising. A subtle nudge guiding choices you previously overanalyzed. Moments that once felt meaningless begin to carry weight. Opportunities appear that you might have missed. Not because they're new, but because your awareness is finally tuned to notice them. Life starts to respond, not to your efforts, but to the coherence you bring inwardly. Actions align without strain. Decisions feel lighter. The nervous system begins to trust itself again. Even brief periods of noticing your own awareness create momentum. Clarity appears in small ways. A pause in thought. An unexpected sense of calm. Or the sudden recognition that a situation you feared isn't urgent after all. These windows of insight aren't rare. They're what you've been glimpsing all along. The difference now is that you allow yourself to stay in them longer. You let the quiet linger instead of rushing to label, judge, or escape. And here's the fascinating part. Acting in alignment with these subtle moments accelerates transformation. Each small choice made from awareness strengthens the connection. Like threads weaving a fabric that was always inside you, waiting to be recognized. You may not feel changed yet. The external world may continue its old patterns. But internally the shift has already begun. The first noticeable change after the merge. The first change isn't visible to anyone else. It's quiet, subtle, almost imperceptible. It doesn't announce itself with accomplishment or drama. It comes as stillness. Your mind begins to slow, not because you try, but because it no longer dominates every corner of your attention. Thoughts rise, sure, but they no longer demand obedience. You watch without reacting, and in that watching the nervous system relaxes. You feel less tension in your body. The habitual gripping, the constant scanning, the internal debates, they soften. Even small anxieties no longer pull you into their rhythm. You notice internal quiet, but it's not emptiness. It's a presence. A gentle sense that life is not happening to you but with you. Moments of indecision feel lighter. Emotional swings lose their edge. You are not perfect, but you are aligned. You may start to recognize that overthinking loses its urgency. The endless rehearsing of conversations, worries, or what-ifs begins to fade. Decisions come easier not because you force clarity, but because clarity already exists beneath the chatter. Even the body senses it. There is an ease, a subtle confidence, a quiet integrity in posture and breath. A feeling that nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be proven. And the beauty of this first shift is that it signals something irreversible. Once awareness becomes obvious in daily life, you cannot unknow it. You may return to old habits temporarily, but the mind now carries a witness. You've glimpsed a deeper current, and it will not let you slip entirely back into noise. What the merge does, and doesn't, do. The merge with awareness doesn't grant magic. It doesn't make life perfect, remove challenges, or erase discomfort. Nothing external changes automatically. The world remains unpredictable. Circumstances don't bend to your will. Problems still appear. People still act as they always have. What changes is how you experience it all. The friction between thought, emotion, and circumstance softens. You no longer fight life from the inside. Instead, life begins to move with your attention rather than against it. The merge doesn't create extraordinary powers. It doesn't give you prophetic visions or mystical abilities. It simply shows you the continuity beneath the chaos. The awareness that has always been present, even when the mind believed it was lost. This is why some people feel disappointed at first. They expect transformation to be loud, to feel dramatic, to produce immediate results. But awakening is never a fireworks show. It's a subtle recalibration, like the steady pulse returning after a storm. What the merge does do is remove internal friction. It softens compulsions, reduces inner conflict, and lets you move through life with clarity rather than reaction. It changes your relationship with your thoughts, your emotions, and your past, allowing choice rather than instinctive loops. What it doesn't do is remove the lessons of life. Obstacles still exist. Challenges remain. Awakening doesn't exempt you from human experience. It gives you presence to meet it consciously. And once you understand this distinction, you'll see why humanity is now ready for a resurgence of this teaching. Because clarity isn't about escaping life. It's about participating fully, without being pulled under by the noise. Why this teaching is resurfacing now. The world has changed. Not just around you but inside humanity itself. Collective awareness is expanding slowly but unmistakably, and with it comes an increased capacity to hold complexity without panic, to feel deeply without being consumed. Chaos is no longer merely destructive, it is catalytic. The turbulence you've witnessed in politics, culture, relationships, and technology has forced internal recalibration. People who once ignored subtle awareness are now being pushed inward. The pressure of external instability has created a demand for inner stability. That is why ancient practices like this one resurface periodically. They are not random. They appear when a critical mass of souls is quietly ready to notice the quiet spaces within themselves. When there are enough sensitive, open hearts to receive what was always available, and to live it in a world that still functions on distraction and noise. This isn't about new age trends or fleeting spiritual movements. It's about timing. About readiness meeting opportunity. About the collective evolving to a point where subtle truths can be remembered, not just studied or imagined. You may have felt hints of this shift yourself. Moments where the usual distractions no longer fully capture your attention. Patterns repeating until they finally make sense. A quiet, growing insistence to step inward even as life moves outward. It's not coincidence that you are hearing this now. You are part of this wave of readiness. Not because you are better, faster, or luckier. Because the world has quietly aligned. and you have aligned internally enough to notice it. Meeting the real self, the disorientation phase. The first encounter with your real self is rarely serene. Can feel strange, even unsettling. Because who you have been, your habits, your beliefs, your identity, no longer fully fits. You notice contrasts between inherited expectations and authentic impulses, between the life you were trained to live and the life that actually calls you. This phase is disorienting because your mind clings to what it knows. Your body clings to patterns it has practiced for years. Your emotions cling to familiar highs and lows. Yet, in the gaps between these old patterns, the real self emerges quietly. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. And for those accustomed to performing, controlling, or protecting, this natural presence can feel almost invisible. Yet it resonates in ways that are impossible to ignore. You may notice subtle discomfort. Relationships that once seemed vital feel heavy. Tasks that once defined your day feel meaningless. Your sense of purpose may wobble. This is not a sign of regression. It is a signal that the old self is making space for authenticity. The disorientation is temporary but necessary. It separates the inherited from the chosen, the borrowed from the authentic. And here's the truth: discomfort is not a failure. It is a sign that clarity is emerging, that the quiet, ever-present awareness you've glimpsed is beginning to anchor in everyday life. Letting the old identity fall away. The old identity doesn't vanish all at once. It dissolves quietly, piece by piece, often without you noticing at first. You may start losing interest in validation. The praise you once sought no longer carries weight. The roles you performed, whether at work, in relationships, or even within yourself, begin to feel constraining. Obligations that once seemed sacred now feel heavy, and some relationships that once defined you feel misaligned. This isn't rejection or failure. It's recognition. A signal that your energy is being redirected toward authenticity rather than performance. You may notice a strange relief in saying no, even to things you once thought essential. The fear of missing out begins to fade. Life feels less like a checklist and more like a flowing current you are learning to follow. Loss isn't what this phase is about. It's clarity. Discomfort isn't punishment, it's insight. Every part of the old identity that falls away makes space for alignment, for presence, and for the quiet integration of awareness into daily life. You may feel unmoored temporarily. The world may feel slightly different. But this is exactly the point. Old habits, old pressures, old attachments have no place in the new flow. And in letting go, you discover how much energy is freed simply by not trying to be who you were told to be. The role of truth over comfort. Awakening asks a quiet, radical question. Will you honor truth even when it feels uncomfortable? This is the subtle threshold most people avoid. Comfort tempts you to cling to the familiar, the safe, the socially approved. It whispers that staying small is easier, that avoiding discomfort preserves security. But truth doesn't negotiate with comfort. It doesn't apologize, explain, or sugarcoat. It simply exists, waiting for recognition. And the more you honor it, the more your internal world realigns. The real self prioritizes alignment over approval. It chooses integrity over convenience. It feels expansion not as luxury but as necessity. Even if it means letting go of people, beliefs, or patterns that once defined your life. At first, this can feel frightening. Old comforts tug at you with subtle guilt or anxiety. The familiar routines, familiar thoughts, familiar validations. They seem safer than stepping fully into what is real. But each act of honesty, however small, loosens the weight of the past. Each choice to follow truth, even in private moments, reinforces the inner space where awareness dwells. It signals to your nervous system, your mind, and even your body. This is safe. This is allowed. This is who you really are. Over time, prioritizing truth over comfort becomes effortless. The friction fades. Decisions become clearer. The subtle energy of presence replaces the constant strain of performance. Awakening as an entrance, not an escape. Awakening is not about leaving life behind. It's not a portal to perfection, peace without effort, or freedom from responsibility. Life continues in all its complexity, unpredictability, and chaos. The external world does not bend to your newfound awareness. What changes is how you move within it. Presence replaces drifting. Observation replaces reaction. Choice replaces autopilot. Suddenly, you notice the difference between living from the noise and living from the quiet. You respond rather than react. You act rather than push. You align rather than resist. This entrance into awareness is subtle but profound. It doesn't require leaving relationships, jobs, or responsibilities behind. It simply transforms your relationship to them. Challenges remain, but the friction you once felt is softened. Obligations are still present, but they no longer define you. Life flows through you instead of overwhelming you. And here's the quiet beauty: the more you allow presence, the more effortless life feels, not because circumstances change, but because your relationship to them has shifted. Awakening is not a destination. It's a doorway. One step in the right direction opens a path that was always here, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the effort, beneath the story. In the next and final part, you'll receive gentle reassurance, closure, and an affirmation of alignment, reminding you that you are not behind, late, or lost, but exactly where you are meant to be. Gentle closing and reassurance. Thank you for staying present this far. You've allowed yourself to listen, to notice, and to feel. That alone is an act of alignment. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not lost. Awakening is unfolding, not arriving. It cannot be rushed, forced, or measured by someone else's clock. It happens quietly, internally, at the exact pace your readiness allows. Trust the process. Trust the pauses. Trust the subtle nudges, the fleeting clarity, the moments when silence feels heavier than thought. Every glimpse of awareness you've had, every brief pause you've noticed, every small choice to follow truth over comfort. All of it matters. All of it signals that you are stepping into alignment. There is no failure in the quiet. There is no wrong path. There is only movement toward presence. Carry this with you. The merge has already begun. You've touched it, perhaps without realizing it. You will touch it again more fully each day. And each step forward is proof that the doorway is real and open. Breathe. Notice. And let life meet you where you are. Because this is not an ending. It is your entrance. And you are exactly ready. You've just taken a quiet journey inward, through the noise, the pauses, and the subtle openings of awareness. You've glimpsed the truth that awakening isn't a distant goal, a dramatic transformation, or a reward reserved for the chosen. It's already here. It's already you. Now the next step is simple. Continue noticing. Allow the practice, the pauses, the breath, and the gentle presence to anchor in your daily life. Each small moment of awareness is a thread weaving you back into coherence. Every choice to honor truth over comfort strengthens your connection to Source. If this message resonated with you, take one intentional action today. Whether it's 5 minutes of noticing your breath, journaling your awareness, or simply pausing to feel the quiet within. Share your experience in the comments below, so other quietly awakening souls can find resonance and support. Subscribe and click the bell to continue walking this path with us. Because the journey inward is subtle, profound, and best traveled together. Remember, you are not behind. You are not lost. You are exactly where you're meant to be. And every moment of recognition is a step closer to merging fully with the Source. Keep noticing. Keep trusting. Keep aligning.